already. And I think actually we're, to allow people to kind of continue to trickle in, we're actually starting today with the roll call, but then also with staff updates. So Sarah, if you want to go ahead and call the roll, that'd be fine.
Okay. Okay, Gregory Braille.
He's here.
I'm here.
Bill Burton.
Here.
Tony Carrasco.
Not here yet.
In Young Cho.
Not here yet.
Larry Klein.
Here.
Nadia Nayak.
Here.
Keith Reckdahl.
He just texted me. He should be on shortly.
Okay. Dave Shen.
Here.
Carrie Templeton.
Here.
Great. So we do have a quorum. Okay, so we're going to start with item number 2, which is staff updates. Staff, we would love to hear how the town hall is going. Philip, I like your background.
Thank you. I'm actually in the town hall right now.
Yes.
So yeah, the background is actually the virtual town hall. My background here on the screen is our virtual town hall, the virtual El Palo Alto room. So yeah, it's going well. And I guess, we're here to, provide the message that if you haven't visited, you should definitely visit and tell your neighbors. Come join in. Tomorrow night, we're going to be responding to some of the questions and feedback that we've received on the Churchill alternatives, and also as well as some general, and that'll be on YouTube Live. It can be found on Connecting Palo Alto, connectingpaloalto.com, our website. And also you can access it directly from the virtual town hall. And just to share again, the virtual town hall website address is vrpaloalto.com. And please tell your friends, neighbors, and anyone you think might be interested in checking out all the materials there. It's quite a lot of information, and a lot of that represents the hard work that this group, the XCAP, has done. Ripon, is there anything else we wanted to share about the town halls?
No, there are just 2 sessions like Phil mentioned for so August 3rd, August 27th and September 3rd. So
that's right. So on September 3rd, thanks Ripon, on September 3rd, we'll be going over the Meadow and Charleston alternatives. And currently the town hall is scheduled to be up through September 7th. So if you haven't had a chance to visit yet, don't worry, you're not too late yet. And if you already have visited and provided feedback, thank you. Also note that there's 2 different sections where you can provide feedback. There's when you actually go in and look at an alternative. After you exit looking at that alternative, you can provide feedback on that or really any alternative. And then at the bottom of the page, there's a virtual town hall feedback form. And moving on, the one other thing that I'd like to mention is that we presented all the Churchill alternatives to the city school traffic or city school liaison committee last week. Sorry, I'm getting my committees mixed up. They asked some questions about the alternatives. They didn't necessarily give us specific feedback on any of the specific alternatives, but really just asked some questions. And I think that their main kind of action was to encourage their students and their parents to go to the virtual town hall and to provide feedback. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair Nayak.
Thank you. So just a couple of questions. Did the City School Liaison Committee say whether or not they're going to refer it to the City School Traffic Committee? I know maybe not the school board, but the traffic committee is a different committee that might be able to provide some technical feedback. Do we think that that might be something we might expect?
I think that we will plan on taking it to the city school traffic committee regardless. And actually, as far as I know, and they're actually meeting, I believe, tomorrow, but as far as I know, the school board does not currently have representation on that. So that's a whole nother issue that we're trying to look into.
Okay. And then going back to the town hall, I did want to ask, we've gotten a few, XCAP has gotten a few emails. Number one, thanking the XCAP for the virtual town hall. And I want to make it clear that the accolades go to the city staff and AECOM, because this is your baby with our work in it. But
Well, if I can, yeah, I think it's shared. I mean, I think it's
yes,
it's not the city and AECOM alone. I think it's been a lot of hard work that the XCAP has taken to develop the materials along with us or help us with all that.
for sure. I think they're referring to the slickness of the kind of virtual world, which we had nothing to do with. So I just want to give you those accolades. But then I did want to ask, there was a little bit of feedback. We got some emails about not being able to sort of put virtual sticky notes sort of thing, or being able to comment on certain sections. Is that something that you guys will be tweaking? I mean, have you gotten any specific feedback related to how we can make it more interactive to sort of improve the town hall experience while it's up? And can you talk a little bit about the process for that?
I'm glad you asked that question, because it reminded me of something that I'd forgotten to mention. There's a tutorial that I recorded with a member of AECOM that's up there, and it can be found essentially when you enter the room to your left. It's also on the connectingpaloalto.com website. The tutorial walks you through how you will interact with the room or how you can use it if you've never done a room like this, but it also tells you how you can provide feedback. And we did receive one comment about the request to provide feedback on the different alternatives. And the issue was that, the tutorial really explains how you provide feedback on each of the alternatives. And there is an option to do that. So I guess, yeah.
So do the tutorial is basically the
well, do the tutorial if you feel like you need to. Feel free to go ahead and interact. The tutorial is pretty short. I think it's under 10 minutes long, and should give you a really good background for how to interact with the room, how to provide feedback. We do allow for feedback on all of the alternatives, and an overall feedback form on the bottom if you want to provide general comments.
Great. And I've just getting the correction that it's the City School Transportation Safety Committee. That's the name of the actual committee, just if I get the name right. Okay, did any ex-cappers have any questions for staff or anything they wanted to talk about related to this item? Yep, In-Young?
So when I went to initially the first page of the virtual town hall, I was excited. It was very nice, but that's only new options are listed. So, people like, do we want to specify that this is only new one? Or, for example, like I'm like favor of a closing Churchill, and I don't see that option in that nice and, the virtual town hall thing. So I was just wondering if there is that intentional, or is it something, can you comment on that? If people wanted to look at the existing option, where do they go?
Yeah, so I don't know what you mean by the existing option, but all of the alternatives that are currently under consideration are included in the virtual town hall. So I might suggest you utilize the tutorial, unless I'm totally misunderstanding your question.
No, you go to first page. There is like 9 options or 6 options that doesn't have a church closure option in there to see the animation.
Yeah, so the animations are only related to the closure, to the grade separations. No, not all the grade separation, all the 8 grade separation, because the closure does not create like a grade separation. That animation is not listed, but all the alternatives for the Churchill, when you click on the Churchill Avenue location on the tabletop, it will open up all the options, including the closure option 1 and option 2 as well.
So okay, so that wasn't
so what you're speaking about is the screen that shows the animation for the construction staging, I believe. So yeah, it's when you actually click on the tabletop. The tabletop has all the different locations, Churchill and Charleston Meadow. When you click into Churchill, that's where you can look at and view all of the different project documents and information, and also see the 3D kind of look-arounds for the different alternatives.
Okay.
Yeah, I think she brings up a good point, though, which is that unless you know that we don't have a construction phasing video for a closure, then you may miss clicking on that and then being able to see the bike ped crossing that we would have with a closure, right?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of the point of seeing the tutorial, so you can see where you find all the different alternatives information.
Yeah, no, I mean, I see what you're saying, but I think if you're going video by video, I'd be afraid that you missed it. But I hear what you're saying, and yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So again, I think the biggest message for everybody is do the tutorial, because that's the best way we can make sure that people are getting to see all the options. Did you have something else in here?
No, that's all. I just okay. Well, I'll go look at. I mean, I know it's there. It's just, you know, people new to it. They're just not. Oh, this is just the options we have, right? Because anyway, I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Greg, did I see your hand up?
No, I was just going to make a real quick comment that I love the 3D animation, and I didn't actually see that when we talked about this earlier. And I wish I could make it bigger, because I'm finding that to be the most useful tool to see what the different options look like. But most of my screen is taken up by a beautiful rendering of the conference room full of fake people. What I really want to do is I want to like zoom right in on the intersection and imagine what these would look like. And that's the best tool we have so far for it. So thank you for doing it. I just wish it were bigger.
Phil?
So I went through most of the tutorial. I want to say Philip Kamai is an excellent tutorial deliverer. The other guy, the ACOM guy, sounded like he was in an echo chamber. It was very hard to follow him at times. So probably because he's doing this at home, maybe with his phone. So I'd like to suggest that he re-record that part of the tutorial under better sound conditions.
Okay.
Okay. Otherwise, I'm also concerned about the lack of sticky notes. I think that's, but I'm not sure we can address that in the time frame we have.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Great, awesome. So Philip and Ripon, if there's any kind of major tweaks that happen as a result of feedback that you get, maybe if you could let us know week by week, so we can use this platform to kind of be messaging back to people that, hey, you got heard and these are the changes that have been incorporated, that would be super helpful. So let's just make sure that we agendize an update on the town halls from now until.
Yeah, we can include it in our staff updates.
Great, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? All right, so seeing none, we will move to the next item on the agenda. So this is oral communications, where members of the public can speak to any item not on the agenda. Now would be the time to please raise your hand digitally. I see 4 hands up so far. We're going to give 2 minutes for this part of oral communications because, as you guys know, we have a big day ahead. So let's see, I see 6 hands. I will turn it over to Shrupat so they can do the roll call for me or do the public comment for me.
It's actually Jose, but
oh, thanks, Jose. Sorry.
It's okay. No worries. We have 6 people who've raised their hand. The first speaker is Kathy Jordan, followed by Art Small. I'm going to allow you to talk, Kathy. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, you can hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to the XCAP for your hard work and all the time commitment that you've put in. I'd like to reiterate that against Churchill closure, and wanted to bring up about the deliberations that the XCAP will be undergoing and the potential recommendations. Considering that the XCAP was asked to make recommendations under certain assumptions and conditions which no longer exist, considering that Caltrain's business plan is no longer in operation, it is paused. Considering that Caltrain itself plans to do its own grade separation study and with its own recommendations, and considering that Caltrain ridership, as we know, has declined precipitously, it may take quite a period of time for that to recover, if ever. Given the concerns about the use of public transportation, the health and safety concerns about using it, given all of these phase shifts, as we know, the ground shifting under everyone's feet, The assumptions and conditions that the XCAP was asked to make recommendations under no longer exist. And so any recommendations that are made will have to have an asterisk beside them. So please keep that in mind. Thank you for consideration.
Thank you. Next, we have Art Small, followed by Mr. Lapierre. I'm going to unmute you, allow you to talk. Please unmute yourself, Art.
Thank you. Hi, thanks for the opportunity to speak to the board. I am a Southgate resident who strongly supports closing Churchill at Alma. I respect the energy and commitment of the group proposing the underpass, but I feel duty-bound to say that they do not speak for me or for many of my neighbors. Briefly, Churchill closure is the best solution because it will restore Churchill as a neighborhood street that would be safe for bicyclists, pedestrians, and Pali kids to cross. It currently is very risky to get onto the street. The underpass itself is undesirable for many reasons. One, it's dangerous. It will create a high-speed arterial on Churchill that will put pedestrian and cyclist lives at risk as people come off of Alma, go through an underpass and think they're on a freeway. It's useless because it will not solve the traffic problems it's aimed at. All the traffic using that Churchill underpass to cross Palo Alto will wind up at Embarcadero and Oregon intersections anyway, leaving them just as congested. It's ruinously expensive. And after investing 100 million or 200 million in the underpass, the city will still have to improve the Embarcadero and Oregon intersections. The advantage for local residents is trivial. At best, it might save a few minutes for a trip east of Alma, if that. And given the fact that all the traffic is going to go back to the same intersections, even that small advantage is not likely to happen. As for the viaduct, it's simply awful, and I hope we no longer consider it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Lapierre, followed by Jason Stinson. I'm going to allow you to talk.
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody, we're supposed to speak to items that are not on the agenda. So talking about Churchill during this time is not appropriate. You should please hold those comments to the next item, which would be number 4. That would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Lapierre, if you can unmute yourself.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm actually a Mrs., but that's okay. I'm a resident of Old Palo Alto, and I'm talking to my neighbors about what's going on with the committee. Almost none of them know anything about it. And I'm wondering if the city has looked into mailers or flyers enclosed in the utility bills or some other way to get the word out about what the decisions are being made and what the options are. And I also noticed that even the all, and so people who know nothing about this and are being told at the last minute to get involved are going to be very confused. So I think the city should make a bigger effort to reach out to people in other neighborhoods, such as Southgate, or outside of Southgate, such as Old Palo Alto, or other neighborhoods around the other intersections, to make sure that they realize that big decisions are going to be made in their neighborhood with taxpayer funds, and that they should get involved in the discussion. And I would really encourage the city to make an effort to communicate more widely about what's going on. And I agree very much with Kathy Jordan that the scenarios have completely changed, and the committee should really either take a pause or take a step back, because the options that we're considering 6, 8, 9, 12 months ago are really not viable right now. So I encourage you to make more of an effort to educate people, and also acknowledge the current budget and other climate, including what's going on with Caltrain. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Ms. Lapierre. Next, we have Jason, followed by Hazlett. Let me allow you to speak.
Yeah, hey ho. Just real quick, I've been sent. I know I've sent a number of emails to the XCAP at City of Palo Alto email address over the last few months. I was talking with one of the XCAP board members yesterday, and he was mentioning that my emails were going into his spam folder. So that's something, and I know, and I had originally brought it up because I think I had also gotten a quarantined bounce back from Keith's email demon. My email address comes from Yahoo. I don't know if it's a Yahoo thing, but I don't seem to have normally spam problems, but it's something that you might want to check into. It sounds like it's making it into the XCAP packet, but if there are other folks in the community who are sending emails and trying to give updates or trying to give feedback and they're going into spam folders, that might be something that XCAP may want to look into. You might be missing some feedback from different folks. For me, I ended up taking the same two emails that I sent last night and sending them from my work address, which seemed to go through without landing in anyone's spam folder. But I definitely think you obviously don't want to be missing public feedback on a regular basis. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks. Next, we have Barbara Hazlett, followed by Eduardo Latch. Let me allow you to talk, Ms. Hazlett.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your time. Just a quick comment on the virtual town hall. I wanted to point out, Philip mentioned that all the alternatives are shown, and I have gone through the town hall, but there is one glaring omission, which is that with respect to Churchill, the do nothing option is not shown, and that is still on the table. So I think you need to rectify that on the virtual town hall. And then finally, my other comments echo much of what Kathy said. Clearly, the grade separation exercise along this corridor needs to be put on pause. It's a colossal waste of time, money, and destruction of a town to address an issue whose underlying assumptions are so obviously no longer valid. You are the advisory committee to council and are obliged to report the truth. The truth is evident. There's no need for your further deliberations. Please do the responsible thing and inform the council accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Eduardo Latch, followed by Susan Newman. Please go ahead, Eduardo.
Yes, thank you. I hope I'm speaking at the right time. First of all, I want to thank you for the great work researching all the options and laying them out objectively. I really appreciate all the work you're doing. I want to encourage you to recommend the Churchill closure with mitigations. It is by far the best alternative for all of Palo Alto.
Eduardo, you can hold your Churchill recommendations for the next item, please. This is just for things not on the agenda. It's okay.
I wasn't sure what this was. I apologize.
No, it's okay. This is just any item that's not on the agenda. So basically, if you have anything about the town hall or something not Churchill.
Thanks.
Sure.
I guess
all right. Next, we have Susan. Please unmute yourself.
Hi there. So it is a little confusing what you're allowed to speak to at this point because all of the comments have been about the Churchill options, but I will stick to the rules and say about the town hall that I wonder if there is any possibility of allowing residents to see the feedback of other residents. That's really important to a lot of us, and I find it stimulates one's thoughts and expands one's mind to be able to hear how other people are thinking about things as well. And I know that the city is going to be holding the question and answer session on Thursday, and presumably some of those will be, you'll get a feel for what other people are saying, but it would really be nice to see or hear the actual comments of residents. And also I wondered why the construction phasing process for closure has not been included. Seems like an oversight. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have David Epstein. I'm gonna allow you to talk. Please unmute yourself.
Yep. Yeah. Hi. Thank you. And I have more about Churchill, but since we're talking about the website, I noticed that Professorville is not included in the choices of where we can be commenting from, and I thought maybe you should fix that. That's all I have. Thanks.
Okay, that concludes all our speakers.
Thank you. Philip and Ripon, did you want to respond to the question about what report back there will be eventually at the end of all the town halls? What can the public expect?
Yeah. Oh, good. It actually let me unmute. I was having a little bit of technical difficulties there. Yeah. So actually, as the member of the public mentioned, we will be responding to feedback that we've received and questions and comments that we received through the process of our feedback form tomorrow night for Churchill, and also we'll be dealing with some general ones. And we're also planning to post that on the website as well, post all the information that we gather. And we're planning to do a blog where we share the end results or whatever information we collect from the town halls. And I think to answer your question, all of the feedback and all the information that we collect from this, we would be posting publicly. So.
Great. And will it also be presented at an upcoming city council meeting, or at least be included in the packet that council gets?
Yeah, I'm not sure how, but we will be sharing it with city council.
Great. Thank you. Okay, and that concludes our oral communications portion. So now we're moving on to the big item of the day, which is, of course, to begin our deliberations on Churchill. I wanted to lay out for everybody how this is going to go. And actually, before that, I wanted to acknowledge Keith Reckdahl actually entered the meeting just before we started the comments on oral communications. So for the record, Keith is here. But we obviously expect that deliberating for this might take some time. And so what we're going to do is actually take public comment first before deliberations begin. And in order to make sure that everybody gets time to say whatever they need, we're going to allow people 3 minutes during oral communications. The idea would be that anybody will go as long as it takes to get through however many speakers want to raise their hand for this portion right now. And once that ends, we will begin our deliberations. And if it continues then to the next meeting, folks who've already commented today will not have a chance to comment again afterwards, because this will be a continued meeting. Obviously, if we get someone who, for a good reason, missed today's meeting, we can allow them to comment. But really, we're trying to make sure that we get all the public comment ahead of before we begin our deliberations. So I was going to ask for the members of the public who want to speak on Churchill. Now is the chance to raise your hand, and each speaker will have 3 minutes, and we will take all of the public comment at the beginning and go through. I only see one hand up so far, which I find hard to believe. So I just want to reiterate, this is the chance to make your public comment for speaking on Churchill. I kind of feel like this is an auction where I should see hands starting to go up. If there was paddles, I would be seeing paddles. But so this would be the time for everyone to speak. And of course, you can speak about any of the alternatives that we have for Churchill. So again, I only see 3 hands up. Mm-hmm. I will encourage anybody who wants to talk about Churchill, make a recommendation, tell us what you think. This is the time. So, okay, I will let you just start it, Jose. And if people keep raising their hands, that's okay. We'll take them as they come.
Absolutely. Okay, the first speaker is Susan Newman, followed by Miss Lapierre. So give me a second here. Susan, please unmute yourself.
All right. So I'm a little blindsided because of the change of process, and I'm thinking that my thoughts are well enough put together that I'm okay with forfeiting any other opportunity to speak on this. But anyway, first I want to just say that I've been following this process, as you know, since the first days of the original CAP. And I really appreciate not only all of your perseverance, which is no small thing at this point, but your diligence and seriousness in trying to understand in detail the implications of this very complex project. You have a hard job in making this decision, and I appreciate your taking it on. I do want to agree with the point about the widespread lack of awareness among affected neighborhoods. I don't think this is something that XCAP can address at this point, but I hope that you will include a strong recommendation to the city that the kind of outreach be radically improved before city council makes a decision. Then let's see, I want to emphasize one issue as you're beginning your deliberations. You're trying to balance, or maybe more accurately, decide the weighting of a lengthy list of criteria in making this decision. I urge you to prioritize the initial shorter list of top priorities of council approved criteria, and to recommend to council that we address the many other also important criteria with additional transportation and bicycle safety efforts, beautification efforts, what have you. At the top of that initial list is improve east-west connectivity for all modes of traffic. In spite of Gary Black's rosy predictions about improved level of service at a few intersections, I don't think anyone who lives in Palo Alto and has looked at this seriously considers closing Churchill as advancing that goal. I certainly don't think it'll achieve that for people living west of the tracks, most of whom, with the exception of Southgate, have not been heard from. But in case you forgot, which I'm sure you didn't, I remind you that in the case of Southgate, a majority of the residents in that neighborhood do not wish to see Churchill closed. And I would add, since I was on the inside of that survey effort, that was without heavy outreach to the people that we knew opposed closure. So I think the numbers are even more convincing had we done that. Also, just a little reminder that the east-west movement around town doesn't happen only at peak traffic hours. Palo Alto residents move around town throughout the day and on the weekends as well. And closure just completely cuts all of that off.
Susan, you've reached your time limit.
Oh, have I? Oh, I just felt like I had loads of time. Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Next, we have Ms. Lapierre, followed by Barbara Hazlett. Ms. Lapierre, if you can unmute yourself.
Thanks. So I would like to remind the committee that there are only 4 crossings in Palo Alto. That would be Palo Alto Avenue, Churchill, East Meadow, and Charleston. And closing any one of those is a pretty drastic decision. And I noticed that we're not discussing closing at El Palo Alto. We're not talking about closing at East Meadow or Charleston. We're only talking about closing at Churchill. And I'm curious why that is even given so much credence, because I think it doesn't make a lot of sense to close one of the 4 crossings in town. I think that leaving it alone should be listed as an option on your surveys and on the response forms, because I'm sure there are plenty of people that feel that way. And it doesn't, having it completely left off as an option makes it look as though the committee has already decided that Churchill will be closed in one way or another, and they're not really considering keeping it open, even though East Meadow and Charleston will be left open. So I'm wondering why you can't just add that option, leave alone, leave Churchill as is, mitigate traffic with better signals on Embarcadero and Page Mill. And that should be a higher priority than pushing through a closure of Churchill. And I also think that you should consider the fact that Palo Alto High School is right there. It's a very big school. There are 2,000 students, plus staff, plus people who work in maintenance and bus drivers and everyone else. And this has a huge impact on them. And I'm not sure if you would consider closing the intersection next to Gunn, for instance, the other big high school in town, or next to any other school. So I'm curious what the logic is to closing a street that helps take people to and from a school with probably 2,500 people at it every single day. And so I just think the committee should be more transparent and admit that there might be an option, which is do nothing, and put that out there. And I think that that would probably, if and when they get around, the city starts advertising things and making people more aware, that might end up being a very popular option that might surprise you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Barbara Hazlett, followed by Yurichiro Yokomtaku. Barbara, if you can unmute yourself.
Hi again. Yes, well, I strongly oppose the closure of Churchill, as the prior speakers have pointed out important reasons. But also, very importantly, let's try to bring this conversation up to the 40,000 foot level. The pandemic has created a paradigm shift, otherwise known as a major phase change, with virtual space being swapped for physical space. Companies are embracing work at home or work anywhere for large swaths of their workforce. One consequence is the plummeting of the use of mass transit. As Sebastian Petty from Caltrain frankly told you a few weeks ago, there is a question of whether Caltrain is even sustainable. Just see for yourselves, train after train passes through Palo Alto with no riders on board. Clearly, the grade separation exercise along this corridor, including the closure of Churchill, needs to be put on pause. And yes, I want to reiterate that there is a huge omission in the virtual town hall meeting that does not show that the do nothing option is still a very viable option that the council left on the table. And to not show it demonstrates a bias, which I find very disturbing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Yurichiro Yokomtaku, followed by David Kennedy. Taku, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much. My name is Yurichiro Yokomtaku. I live on the 100 block of Kellogg. I submitted a fairly comprehensive list of comments in July on behalf of the residents of the 100 block of Kellogg, which I can say that I represent almost unanimously with regard to their opposition to the tunnel. At a high level, and once again, EXCAP, thank you very much for the time that you've invested over the last, I think it's 2-3 years for many of you. I don't think that you've had a conversation about the criteria used to determine what your recommendation is. I might suggest a few. One is cost, and I'm certainly going to pick criteria that support kind of my position that I do not think that the partial underpass plus the Kellogg tunnel works. Certainly closure is the cheapest option. Secondly, criteria on property impacts. I understand that the City Council has given you a number of criteria to discuss, but some criteria are more important than others. So, under the heading of property impact, you have to utilize eminent domain in order to capture slivers of property. I assure you that there will be challenges to that. And then in a more personal level, I do not want to lose the parking in front of my house along with everyone else on the block. That's not something that I signed up to. The third criteria that I would look at is feasibility. Even if you recommend Kellogg Tunnel partial underpass to City Council, I do not think it's feasible based on the conversations and the feedback that you'd gotten from Caltrain with regard to the right-of-way. The fourth thing, which has not been talked about particularly, and is the impact of the tunnel on Castelia traffic. I'm sure that you're aware that Architectural Review Board just kind of looked at the latest plans for Castelia. There's a lot of concern about drop off and pickup points. The tunnel will send a whole bunch of Pali High School traffic that'll start conflicting with Castelia traffic. That's probably not a good thing. The other criteria I'd have you look at is finally safety. it strikes me that having a bunch of high speeding cars on Alma closer to the sidewalk, and it seems like a lot of people actually do use that sidewalk, is not a good idea. Plus the conflict with Castelia and the fact that this tunnel is really narrow and you're going to have all these high school kids going through the tunnel a couple times a day, that just doesn't seem safe. And finally, you know, this partial underpass, I think, was simply an outgrowth of a community idea. The Kellogg tunnel is not kind of well thought out. If you're going to do a tunnel, stick it on seal or something. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is David Kennedy, followed by Yurichiro Kishimoto. David, if you can unmute, please.
Yes.
Sorry about that. If you can unmute yourself, David.
David, go ahead and talk.
Yep. Am I on? Can you hear me at this point?
Yes.
Okay. Again, as many of the other speakers have mentioned already, I'd like to acknowledge the commitment of XCAP. It's been a lot of diligent work, a lot of commitment of time. Along with some of the other speakers, also, I'd like to strongly oppose closing Churchill. I think it'd be very disruptive to the community. The comprehensive plan essentially says keep all crossings, whether they're subsurface, separated crossings or not. Considering what I consider unrealistic criteria that the XCAP is dealing with at this point, I think the partial or T underpass is a good solution to a situation that has been created. As I said before, I'm disappointed that XCAP eliminated the hybrid solution, because I think that has a lot of merit, even though it probably would require some property acquisition. And third, I'd like to again echo the comments of the previous speaker. I don't live on Kellogg, but I've lived in Palo Alto for a long time. He laid out many of the reasons, but I urge you to have the AECOM and maybe yourselves as well really look at the other alternatives to putting a bike ped underpass in Kellogg. Essentially would destroy that that 100 block of Kellogg. There'd be no parking. There'd be large amounts of traffic that haven't been there before. It's really a convoluted pathway, tracks, particularly old Palo Alto, trying to go to the west side, whether it's high school or on over to Stanford. So good luck with your additional considerations and discussions. I wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Yurichiro Yokomtaku. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Yes, this is Yuriko Kishimoto. And good afternoon, Chair Naik and members of the XCAP. So yes, I think I agree with most of the previous speakers. I mean, as you dive into the details, I know you have to zoom back and forth between the big picture and the kind of the excruciating details, which are really important of each decision. But as you dive into the details of, you know, Churchill and Meadow and such, and I just didn't want you to lose sight of the other, which is the big picture of Palo Alto crossing. So as someone said, we're trying to improve the permeability and the number and the quality of cross east-west travel in Palo Alto. And so holistically and cumulatively, are we going to have the impact? Are we going to have the conclusion of going down to 2 or 3 places where everyone has to cross if you're in a car, or do you want a more permeable a network of more walkable, bikeable access for? Because I think the long-term goal of the comprehensive plan and most people is that, especially, Stanford is quite is very heavily, oriented. Downtown is, I think all of Palo Alto values walking and biking. And we don't want to go to an expressway model where everyone is forced to get into a car and go on an expressway to get to a different neighborhood. So I just wanted to emphasize that. And also, I think I did mention previously that it would be great if you could put a priority or like a phasing into your recommendation, possibly prioritize South Palo Alto just because they don't have any rail crossings at this point, and then give a little bit more time to look at North Palo Alto as a whole, including Palo Alto Avenue. Okay, so yes, thank you very much for all your diligent work. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Richard Perky, followed by David Epstein. Mr. Perky, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. This is Richard Perky. And I also want to commend the XCAP, the city staff, and all the consultants for the hard work that they've done to identify the pluses and minuses of all of the options that are before us, and including the do nothing option that has been mentioned by a couple of folks. I do want to, again, go back to the last speaker's focus on the big picture of how we improve transit across the rail corridor, the east-west transit across the rail corridor, and to do so in a financially feasible manner. And I do believe that closing Churchill is the most effective option to improve movement across the corridor for all 3 modes of traffic, both vehicle, pedestrian, and bicycle. I've looked at the studies, I've looked at the analysis, and that has been carefully prepared. And the one factor that jumps out at me is that the 3 times the cost for the partial underpass, or the 6 times the cost for the viaduct option, neither of those provide any greater measure of flow or improvement of traffic across the corridor than does the least expensive option, which is the closure with mitigations. And the closure with mitigations, the mitigations and intersection improvements that have been identified facilitate the east-west flow of traffic and also solve a lot of problems that have existed for a long time by the lack of true intersection at Oregon Expressway and Alma, and the Embarcadero and Alma. So I strongly favor and recommend the closure with mitigations. I've lived in Old Palo Alto now for over 30 years. I have 3 now adult children that all cross the railroad corridor to attend Pali. My wife works at Stanford, crosses the rail corridor daily for work, and I cross all the time myself for a variety of shopping. And I understand people's concerns about maintaining cross communication for all of Palo Alto across the corridor, east and west. But I think that the closure with mitigations offers the clearest solution to the problem for this part of town. And we're going to need the money in South Palo Alto and for Palo Alto Ave. So I strongly recommend closure with mitigations. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Epstein, followed by Mohammed Hadidi. David, you're unmuted.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for your work and listening to some of us. I want to speak for the people in Professorville and University South, and that none of the choices other than the viaduct or doing nothing, and leaving it open can address the traffic that's going to impact even greater our neighborhoods in this area of town. So I appreciate that, for the Churchill residents and people in Old Palo Alto and in Southgate would love to have that closed. It certainly is very nice to have less traffic and perhaps greater property values and such. And I feel bad that this is pitting one part of Palo Alto against another. But the issue is that in appreciation of even the last speaker, it would be great to have that closed if I was living over there. But living here, we get all that traffic. And that's just plain unfair. The mitigation that's been proposed has not taken into account two major things that that the XCAP I know hasn't been able to look at. And that is that we're severely impacted already now, that it's dangerous for bikers and pedestrians to walk. The traffic backs up from El Camino to almost to Middlefield during the time, and that's already dangerous. And nobody seems to appreciate that closing Churchill even partially is going to further make that both dangerous and more impactful for all of our neighborhoods here. The other thing that's not taken into account at all is Castelia is expanding, and that expansion, if Churchill is closed, completely comes into our neighborhoods also. So again, I appreciate for those people who are living there and making their area quieter. It is quite unfair to dump all of it into our neighborhood, and our neighborhood is going to be the one that's impacted, given that it's the closest one. And one of the speakers speaking about Palo Alto High School with all of the people, well, where are they going to come and go from the school? It's got to be Embarcadero. And when it's Embarcadero, there's no choice than to make it worse than it is today. I want to speak just briefly for the viaduct option. If you aren't going to do nothing, which is preferable, the viaduct option is probably the best one because it leaves everything open and it reduces the amount of congestion at Churchill. For those people in Southgate that are worried about noise, we lived in Sweden near electric trains, and electric trains are significantly quieter. Actually, you don't even know they're there until they're right on top of you, and then they disappear very quickly than the current ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mohammed Hadidi, followed by Eduardo Latch. Mohammed?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so dear XCAP members, good afternoon. I want to start by thanking you very much for your dedication and for your meticulous and hard work and for vetting all the different issues that are coming up. I strongly support the closure of Churchill with mitigations, and I fervently ask you to support the closure as the best option for this crossing. The reasons are simple. First, the cost, which is almost an order of magnitude less than the other two alternatives. Number two, safety of Palo Alto High School students and street residents. And number three, preserving the residential character of the neighborhood, which would be irretrievably damaged by either the partial underpass or the viaduct. We are happy with the status quo. We are not trying to have Churchill close in order to increase our property values, but the alternatives will pose an almost existential injury to those who are in direct view of these concrete monsters, either the underpass or the viaduct. This existential damage cannot be compared to the slight inconvenience for those in the Southgate area who would no longer have as quick an access to Alma as they currently have. This latter problem, as has been mentioned several times, can be mitigated by opening up Park Boulevard, which is currently blocked off. nor does the existential injury of putting up a massive concrete structure in the midst of a residential area compared to the possible slight increase in traffic for those living close to Embarcadero. The degrees of harm that the three alternatives for Churchill pose to these different constituencies just don't compare in kind and are not in the same league. Number 4, the hexagon traffic study is quite clear that with mitigations, traffic at most intersections impacted by Churchill closure would be better. Only in 2 of the 7 impacted intersections would it be worse, but only slightly so. And to address a point that has been mentioned before, Palo Alto, compared to other towns or cities in the Bay Area, has more crossings, railroad crossings per capita than any other city. So closing one of the many intersections that are currently open shouldn't be a big deal. So once more, I urge you to support Churchill closure as the best option for this crossing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Eduardo Latch, followed by Rob Levetsky. Eduardo?
Yes, thank you. Like everybody else, I want to thank you for the great work. And really, you've laid out the options quite nicely. I want to follow up what Mohammed said regarding existential impacts and critical impacts. And I am pro closing Churchill because I believe, based on all the data that you've done and all the conversations that I've had and looking at it, that it is by far the best alternative. The Kepner-Trigo analysis that you did on the matrix has the closure and Viaduct more or less even with -5 or -6, meaning blue dots minus orange dots, skipping the black dots. The underpass is significantly worse. It's got like -15 because it's got a lot of orange dots. And yet, as Mohammed and everybody else have said, Churchill closure is like 1/3 as expensive as the underpass and 6 times less expensive than the viaduct. So from a cost perspective, the closure is significantly better. The matrix that you have done very clearly outlines the positives and negatives, and I think closure and viaduct are even, and closure is better from a cost perspective and from a number of other reasons, like safety. You've also done the work, and a gentleman before from Professorville pointed out that there are some issues with Embarcadero, yet the mitigation analysis that has been done, and I've been in several of these meetings and the discussions, indicate that if you do the mitigation work, traffic is going to flow much nicer through Embarcadero and address the concerns that the gentleman had around traffic backing up to Middlefield. Castelia has done the analysis. I'm helping Castelia as well. And they've done the analysis and there's going to be no increase in traffic with the option number 4 that they're proposing. Finally, to back up what Mohammed was saying, as a neighbor, I'm interested in how people are being affected. And the viaduct is existentially, critically awful for the people in Mariposa. It doesn't affect me that much, but for the people in Mariposa, it's just horrible. The underpass kills everybody in Churchill. Imagine having a large, concrete structure with a ditch in front of your house. That's existentially, like Mohammed was saying, a real problem. So when you kind of look at cost, you look at critical issues, closure just comes out far ahead by the analysis that you've done on the matrix and on the final report. So again, I urge you to recommend closure. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Rob Levetsky, followed by Rachel Croft. Oops. Go ahead, Rob.
Hello, Rob Levitsky here. I live on Embarcadero. You have neglected for years now the option of just leaving Churchill alone, leave it open. It wasn't bad before with perhaps 7.5 minutes of gate time town with 5 trains in each direction per hour at peak hours. And now the train traffic has gone way, way down. It's down 90%, 94%, some big number like that. So maybe in the future of 10, 20 years, it may be worth looking into doing something. But right now, we don't know that this traffic is ever coming back. It's been a change in society, and we have to sit and wait it out. As far as these other comments like per capita crossings, well, Palo Alto has a 3 times daytime population. So there's already a 3x amount of cars during the day. It's not fair to be dumping all those cars. In the old days before this virus, there were 9,500 cars a day crossing the tracks at Churchill. It really strains credulity to think that you can dump 2/3 of those, because Embarcadero is closer than Oregon, onto Embarcadero by adding signals which stop traffic, and think that it's just a mitigation that's going to work. And as far as the Castelia BS, they're proposing to add 1,000 cars. Well, they have about 1,200 cars a day that come in and out of Castelia, and they've been routing them up Emerson, and guess what, onto Embarcadero. If you have another signal added there at High Street and signals at the Slip Road and at Kingsley, it's just going to slow things down. So nice work, you guys, but you've missed the fact that you just sometimes need to leave things alone. That's supposed to be an option. And that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Rachel Croft, followed by Caillou Lee. Rachel, you can unmute yourself.
Hi there. I just unmuted myself. Thank you so much for taking comments, and thank you so much for your work over the years. It feels like it's been a very long process, and I know for you guys there, really appreciate all the time that the citizens have put towards this issue. I live on Mariposa and Southgate, and I strongly urge you to support the closure of Churchill. I think it's the only option that enables us to preserve the community feeling of the neighborhood. So as people have stated, both of the other options are just massive concrete undertakings. I think there was a lot of hope that the underpass would be this nice, cute, little small project that would keep the traffic limited in that area and not be a gigantic structure. But it's just turned out what was mocked up is an absolutely massive project involving a gigantic underpass and lots of concrete and removal of trees, removal of strips in front of people's houses, taking of Caltrain land. Like, it's just turned into this gigantic thing. It's not something we want in the neighborhood. We don't want a gigantic concrete project in the neighborhood. It'll destroy the nature of the neighborhood and put a lot more traffic on that street. As a person who lives on Mariposa, I'll just tell you personally, I just implore you to not consider the viaduct, as I've spoken multiple times here about the fear of having a viaduct as close as 2 feet behind my back fence, which is 20 feet high with another 20 feet of train on top and another 10 feet of wires. It's just something that I can't even imagine a train being up there, an electric train, and then you put on top of that the possibility of 3 freight trains going up there just right behind our backyard. It just is absolutely inconceivable to have that back there, and would really ruin our backyard for the use that we enjoy it now. I also just want to point out that leaving it open, while it might seem an okay option right now, but I personally believe that this COVID world is going to end, and we're going to end up seeing people get back on the Caltrain, and the plan is to take it up to several hundreds of trains a day versus now it's around 90. And we all know from the noise study that the loudest part of the train passing is the horn, and that horn is not going to stop blowing if the intersection is left open. So besides the traffic effects, again, speaking selfishly, the personal effects of living near 100 decibels going by 250 times a day is just inconceivable, going by so many times. So thank you for my comments. I strongly encourage you to elect closure as the option.
Thank you. Next, we have Caillou Lee. Go ahead, Caillou.
Hi, I'm Q Lee, and thank you so much for giving me a chance to comment. And I like to promote the Churchill closure with mitigation. So like the other speakers already mentioned, Churchill closure with mitigation is much cheaper option than the other two options. And the report says that there will be no or small effect in traffic with the mitigation in Embarcadero. And I like to highlight the impact to the resident from the other two options. So with the viaduct, the families living on Mariposa, their lives will be really critically affected by the huge bridge-like things crossing above their backyard. And with their underpass option, the Churchill, Kellogg, and Coleridge, the resident will be faced with the giant concrete structure in front of their house. And also the houses on Alma, they're gonna lose the landscaping in front of house. There will be no space for their trash bins, for their pickups. And also the people walking on the Alma will be really feel dangerous because of no buffer from the street to the sidewalk. And also Kellogg Avenue resident, they're gonna have the tunnel, underground tunnel in the middle of their avenue, their block, and it will eliminate the parkings and also restrict the turns available from their driveway. So one of the speaker from the processor bill mentioned that with the closure, all the Poly student or the Castelia students will use their blocks, but that is not accurate because with the closure, the Churchill will be open to the pedestrian and the bikers. And Castelia, they're gonna still use Alma and Embarcadero to access the school. So non-option is perfect for everyone, but we have to think about what is the best option that limit the direct huge impact to the resident. So in that point of view, I highly recommend the Churchill closure with mitigation option. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jason Stinson. You may unmute yourself.
Thank you. See if I can get through all this. First of all, I am one of the residents who supports the closure of Churchill. It's been said before, it's over a third, less than a third the cost of the underpass and less than a sixth the cost of the viaduct. We've done the traffic studies. I know there's been a lot of concerns about traffic. Those have been published. They've been out there for over 6 months. Demonstrating that we can handle the closure of Churchill. It makes a ton of sense. I think I just wanted to quickly, I think the survey that was done in the Southgate neighborhood was, the intentions were right, and there was a lot of good things to learn in there. I think ultimately we're always going to have, no matter what, we're going to have neighborhood concerns. There's all these changes are going to affect neighborhoods, and people are going to be worried about how it affects them and what it does. The folks that are supporting the closure of Churchill primarily, they're worried about, for their own, from a personal perspective, they're worried about losing property. They're worried about these large structures that are going to be in their backyard, and they're worried about a major increase in traffic on Churchill itself if we increase the throughput, basically, reduce the resistance to get through there. The folks that are on the interior of Southgate, and I assume also the folks on Embarcadero, they're worried about the having an easy access to North Palo Alto. They're worried about isolating the Southgate neighborhood from North Palo Alto, and they're worried about dumping traffic onto other routes. We're always going to have those concerns. It's going to affect this. Whatever we do here is going to affect folks. I think at the end of the day, we have to just go back to what's good for the greater Palo Alto, and again, it's lower cost. And we've looked at the traffic. I think we actually have the results for that. That's not an unknown. What happens when we close Churchill? It is an unknown when we open up Churchill and make it less, reduce the rail cross, or get rid of the rail crossing. That wasn't studied, the inducement, but we do know what happens when we close Churchill. Anything other than that is just anecdotal information. The other thing about the survey I thought that was interesting is last year the same group did a similar survey, and the people in support of closure opposed to closure last year was at 60%. This year it is at 56%. So it's gone down very slightly, but roughly in the same ballpark. The people that supported closure went up from 24% to 36%. So that's a 50% increase. It's the same number of households reporting. There were about 120 households reporting in both cases. So it's interesting to see that there's a growing support even among neighbors for the closure of Churchill. And lastly, I think you guys have a lot of education work ahead of you. Like there was a lot of talk about trying to leave an at-grade crossing. That's the whole point of this meeting and this discussion is to consider how we would get rid of the at-grade crossings. It doesn't make any sense that people would be bringing that up.
Thank you. That concludes all our speakers.
Okay, I'm just going to make a last call for anybody who's attending today's meeting. This is the only chance you will get to speak on this issue before our deliberations. So if you have been shy, but you really do want to say something before we start deliberating, now would be the day, because otherwise we will not be taking public comment as this continues and potentially carries on into other days. So I just want to make that clear. If anybody wants to raise their hand now, we still have the opportunity to take public comment. Anybody out there? I see Barbara, your hand is up, but you've already spoken. So I'm sort of confused. This is for people who have not spoken to the item and they said, or have not spoken to this item yet on this agenda. Okay, I don't see anybody else. And maybe Barbara has a question that she needs clarification on. Don't know how to handle this.
Would you like me to
unmute? Yeah, sure. Barbara, if you have a question, I'll entertain a question if that's what you're raising your hand about, but otherwise you've already given your comment. So go ahead.
Thanks, Nadia. Yeah, I kind of have a question and a comment. Everybody talks about how great the mitigations are, but the traffic study is horrifically flawed. There were no traffic.
That's a
Embarcadero. My question is, will we be doing any sort of traffic studies on Embarcadero traffic counts?
Okay, so it's not a process question, but you have a project question, which I can direct you to staff afterwards. I thought you were asking about what the public process is.
It's a question and a statement that the traffic study is terribly flawed.
I understand, but you had your chance already, but thank you. I appreciate you raising it. Okay. All right, I don't see any other hands raised, so we will turn it back to XCAP. So thank you so much to everybody for your comments. I've got at least 6 pages of notes, so I want you to know sometimes we don't look up or sometimes we turn our cameras off, but it's really because we're sort of writing copious notes and stuff. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that we are listening and we really appreciate how you guys have been participating this whole time. Before ex-cappers are about to begin their deliberation, I did want to remind us that when we started this process, we agreed to some guiding principles. And I thought it was important to read kind of our expected meeting norms and the culture and the conduct before we start, because I just want to remind everybody what we had agreed to before and just kind of set the tone for how we're going to move forward through these deliberations. So if you'll bear with me for a minute, I'm going to read through these. We have members agree to act in a reasonable, respectful, and courteous manner. They will assist the chair and vice chair in discouraging disruptive behavior and enforcing and following the XCAP rules. So please prepare in advance for and attend all meetings. Treat each member with courtesy and respect. Agree or disagree with ideas, not with people. Identify issues prior to taking positions. Listen and consider the opinions of others. Be brief and clear in your comments. Concentrate on problem solving, not fault finding. Try not to repeat what's already been said. That's just to help us have shorter meetings. Seek common ground. Strive for an enjoyable and rewarding experience. It's supposed to be fun, guys. Focus on discussion related to the meeting objectives. Focus on providing thoughtful, well-meaning input that results in appropriate solutions, representing the community's interests and needs. Work to reach consensus on solutions to the issues discussed. Be positive, respectful, and constructive. And then lastly, we have XCAP members should work in good faith, represent one or more stakeholder groups affected by the project, not personal interests. Maintain flexibility and perspective and be willing to learn and compromise. Accept the fact that the final route of the project has been confirmed. Identify potential conflicts ASAP and let other participants know your concerns. This is kind of when we start to get into if we're deciding something and you've got a real problem with something, we're asking that you step up preemptively if you've got a real issue with whatever's being talked about. Keep constituents informed of the outcome of all meetings in a timely manner. That's really being done more by the website at this point. Commit to regular attendance. I did text Tony. I'm hoping Tony might be able to join us because having everybody attend is really important. I think he's the only one that's missing today. Focus comments, inputs, and deliberations at XCAP meetings, not in the media. Commit to reading materials provided prior to meetings. Be willing to bring new members up to speed. Be courteous and considerate of the interests and ideas of XCAP members, city staff, and consultants. And be willing to contribute any relevant technical background. So those are what we agreed to back in October. I know it seems like ages ago. It feels like 11 years ago, at least for me personally. But I just wanted to say before we all get started, you guys have all been dedicating a lot of your time, and the community members have said thank you, but I would like to say thank you for the amount of hours you guys have all spent on this. So with that, to start us off and to do sort of a warm-up session, what I thought we would do is basically pick an alternative and then have each member of the XCAP say 2 pros and 2 cons of each alternative, just so we can start to hear each other talk, practice kind of talking this stuff through, and hearing where we might have some commonality. So I'm going to start alphabetically. Sorry, Greg. It's just easier for me to keep track of where we are. And I'll let you pick, since you're the first being put on the spot first, which one do you want to start with? The closure, the viaduct, or the partial underpass? So your choice.
I think I need to pick the one that will be the most popular. No, I think we should start with the viaduct.
Okay, great choice.
And
Go
I'll give
for it.
you want me to give you 2 pros and 2 cons?
Yes, please.
Okay. One pro of the viaduct is that it preserves the most amount of connectivity for the most forms of transportation.
Okay.
Mainly it is both cars, pedestrians, and bikes can pass under it. In theory, pedestrians and bikes could actually pass under it in more places than just Churchill, which means we actually could theoretically have more pedestrian and bicycle connectivity across the corridor with the viaduct than with any other option, including doing nothing. The other pro to the viaduct, it's an actual grade separation. I know I will come up with one because but I think that if I go over our evaluation checklist, it's almost like the other pro is that there aren't any other cons except for the 2 I'm going to mention. The other ones have significantly more cons. So let's go over the cons of the viaduct. It's the most expensive. I think I just looked it up. I think the estimate was 300 to 400 million. And I'm just going to assume that means 400 million. And the other pro is that it's the most visually intrusive for the people who live someplace where they can see
You meant
it.
the other con, right? Just
The
to be
other
clear.
con, that's not the pro. No, I'm not happy about that. I'm saying that, and those are the 2 cons. And I guess the other pro of the viaduct is I could probably come up with more cons of the other alternatives.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Phil, that means you're up next.
So let me comment also on the viaduct.
Yeah, actually, I'll have everyone stick to the viaduct since Greg laid out that one.
So one additional pro is the opportunity, and I'm saying the opportunity or the potential for reuse of the land where the tracks are now.
Mm-hmm.
The other con is the perceived community issue around noise propagation.
Sorry, you mean pro or con? You were on
That's a con, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah.
If I put my tongue very firmly in my cheek, I could say this is a great showcase for Caltrain's new service because it'll be up in the air where everybody can see it. But my tongue is very firmly in my cheek when I say that. Since I grew up on the East Coast, I have plenty of experience with elevated rail. While this would certainly be quieter than say the Chicago Loop, which is a steel structure that just radiates noise, or some of these are the current elevated structures in New York, it still is visually intrusive. There's no getting around that. There are elevated structures for Caltrain along the right-of-way in towns like San Bruno, but those are commercial districts, not residential districts. So I would see this as the third of among the three that I chose, would choose if I had to rank them.
Okay.
And this, by the way, is not an easy decision. I mean, this is probably the heart of the putting aside Palo Alto Avenue. This Churchill Crossing is probably going to be the most contentious issue and the most painful one with no easy, obvious answer. And that's, I guess that's a con also.
Okay.
I've said my piece for now.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. I just asked staff to see if they can help Tony. He's trying to get into the meeting. So he would be next. I'm going to skip him and he's going to be real surprised when he gets on and he's going to have to speak. But so In Young, that means you're next.
Okay, so the Viaduct, we only comment on Viaduct?
Yeah, only on Viaduct right now.
I think the pro is connecting east-west of Palo Alto, right? So you don't want to have, you know, people complain about it being an island, Southscape being an island, you know. So the Viaduct will provide connectivity. However, I can't think of a second pro, but I mean, the con is like, there is no room in this Churchill Armor Corridor to put a viaduct. And then it's going to be very dangerous because, you know, it's elevated structure, you know, you might have, you can have the freight train goes above it. And if it's derail, I mean, it's just very dangerous for the, not only just Mariposa, but whole community. I think it's just, you know, it's very dangerous and ugly. And the second con is very expensive. People, you know, we kept hearing again and again, it's expensive. And I mean, I would spend something if I like something, but we don't even like it. And then we want to, you know, justify the spending millions of dollars. I think it's just ridiculous. So I think and then I think I also, you know, because I live in Mariposa and there are a lot of personal issues for me that, you know, the characteristics of Palo Alto district, and not only just for the Southscape, but I think it's going to impact all the Palo Alto residents. Having a viaduct will be ugly, right? So I rather, you know, people do say that, you know, you live in the Southgate, you want to have a closure, you know, you have a personal interest and stuff. But I have to drive extra to go around, right? So it's not, you know, good, you know, it's not slam dunk, it's a good choice. And also, this, you know, people say the traffic, you know, increase and stuff, but the study show that, you know, the mitigation will provide a good solution. So I don't understand why people kept saying same thing again and again, saying, you know, this, you're going to have increase of traffic. Yes, there will be maybe inconvenience, but maybe there is a pull for it. But, you know, traffic, we spent a lot of money due to the traffic study and they said it's doable. So that's something people to rethink about what they're saying, right? So accept some scientific facts rather than just personal feelings or, you know, whatever that, you know, the community in Embarcadero and are talking about. Anyway.
Thank you, Inyang. So I just want to acknowledge Tony that has just entered the meeting. So Tony, just so you know, what we're doing to kind of break the ice is we're starting with the viaduct, and we're each going to say 2 pros and 2 cons. So I'll leave you for last to give you a little bit of time to kind of warm up, and we'll keep going alphabetically. And I just wanted to remind people, in case you missed at the beginning of the meeting, I am now back in my house, but do have some connectivity issues. Like, in fact, it just froze up a little bit for me. So if this gets dicey, I may shut off my camera because that helps with the signal. If it gets very dicey, I will turn it over to Larry and I will be calling in by phone. But I just want you to know I still plan on coming back to this meeting. So my apologies in advance. Xfinity comes tomorrow. So with that, Larry, you're next alphabetically. Are you ready?
No. But I'll speak anyway. I do, before getting into the 2 and 2, I did want to have a few comments on the statements made by members of the public. One is that the speaker said we only have 4 crossings. in town. Actually, we have 7. I think the speaker forgot that we have grade separations at University and Embarcadero and Oregon, in addition to the 3 that we're studying and Palo Alto Avenue, which we have been told not to study. So that adds up to 7. We had more people today than we've had, I think, all during our deliberations so far, speak in favor of the do nothing alternative, and saying we should have done more to expose that to the public. Perhaps the people, several of those who mentioned it, may not realize that we spent a lot of time hearing about what would happen if we do nothing. And the result would be intolerable traffic backups on, as the members of the panel know, on Alma at Churchill, which would not be very good for the community at all. But that sort of gets to the last one I wanted to mention before getting to the 2 and 2, which is why don't we just pack up and go home right now, because Caltrain can't do anything, people aren't riding trains, and so on and so forth. Well, 2 answers to that. One is this is a committee that has a very, very long time frame in mind. We're not proposing that any of these things be built tomorrow. They couldn't be. They're not going to be built next year. They're not going to be implemented because some don't require building them. The time frame on this really is over a 10-year period. Now, what's going to happen over those 10 years? Well, of course, none of us really knows. But my prediction, whatever that's worth, is that we're not going to continue to have social distancing like we're having right now. We're not going to continue to be wearing masks 10 years from now. The history says, well, look what happened in the 1918, 1919 pandemic, I should say. Within a year or 2, people did go back to living the way they normally do. I think that's the most likely result. That's the way people like to live. They don't like living like we're doing now. So for us to pause things or whatever wouldn't accomplish anything. I think we have to assume that the society is going to move forward again, something very similar to what we had before the pandemic hit. And if it doesn't, there are all types of decision points along the way where the decision makers, whether it's the city council or some other agency, are going to be able to make changes. But I think it would not be prudent if we didn't move forward with all the work that we've done and assume that something like this is going to be necessary somewhere over the next 10 years. So the viaduct, to me, the good parts of the viaduct is I'm pretty much echoing what Greg and Phil have said. Sure, it would give us greater connectivity. And that to me is its main virtue, that it would increase the vehicular traffic flow in town. I wanted to mention vehicular because I think everybody seems to recognize that we have 3 modes of transportation we're talking about, vehicular, bikes, and pedestrian. We sort of lose track of the bikes and pedestrian too often. Well, anyway, so for the downsides of the viaduct, one is certainly the cost. And I would just like to expand a little bit on cost, because the consultant sort of sloughs off some of these costings, saying that we're going to have money available for the various alternatives from state and federal money, but we really don't have any assurance of those things right now. And even if we did, I think you have to imagine that there's sort of a budget for Palo Alto at the state and federal level. They're not going to pour billions of dollars into Palo Alto. They're going to, in effect, one way or another, say, what do you really, really want? But that's what, and you're only going to get a portion of what you really like. I think that this Viaduct as a downside would take up way more than what we would like to see out of whatever that budget's going to be. Or if we have to fund it ourselves in Palo Alto, we have to be mindful of what are the voters really willing to support. And that's a real downside to it. One other downside that perhaps didn't get mentioned so far is the several years of construction delays on this project. And while the consultant has told us we really can't quantify that, or it's not appropriate anymore under the way to analyze these projects, I still think though that that's a cost, however it may be valued, that the community would have to bear, and I don't think that would be a very good cost for us to consider, for us to tolerate. Thanks.
Thanks, Larry. Sorry, I caught your first pro was that it's all modes. I missed your second one. What was your second one? Can you remind me?
I don't think there is one.
Yeah, I think everyone's struggling with that one. Okay, no worries. I just want to make sure I didn't miss it. Okay, great. So I'm going to save myself for last because I get to do that as chair, and it's just easier for me to keep taking notes. Keith, you're up next.
Okay. One of the things that we're worried about is east-west connectivity, and especially for bikes and pads, the backtracking is much more of an impact. For a car, if you have to go a half mile of your way, it's not nearly as bad as if you have to walk a half mile of your way. So when we talk about the viaduct, I mean, the bad news is that the bikes must still wait for the light at Alma. But also the impacts, the pros to that are that if you had a tunnel, say, going to Kellogg, that really does impact the neighbors. Same as if you have a tunnel at Churchill. So this in some ways relieves the pressure on the neighbors, but you don't get quite the experience because you still have to wait for Alma. So it's kind of an in-between choice. So that's a pro and a con. The big con is the visual impacts, like Rachel was mentioning, is that if you have this going back in your back fence, it's not going to be pleasant. But the pros then would be that the property impacts is that you probably could do this without any acquisition of properties, which simplifies the construction.
Okay, thank you. Next is Dave Shen.
Let's see. I guess I only have one pro, and that's the connectivity comment that everybody has shared. And I thought I heard Larry give more than one con, more than two cons, but I will pick cost is one big one, many orders of magnitude over the other ones, and visual and sound impacts being so high up there. I don't think the sound is a solved problem, and I'm not convinced that the modeling is completely accurate. I think it's going to carry, as well as the visual impact. If I could make this one comment, and Chair, if you decide to pause this or not, that's up to you. But I was debating about just interrupting in the beginning because I was curious about the overall process, how we go through this. And I thought as you were speaking that you were going to get there, but then you hopped right into the 2 and 2. And so given that someone, like say Larry already said 1 and 4 or whatever it was, I'm actually more curious about how we're going to use a similar process or the same process across the 3 intersections at a higher level, which could inform whether it's 2 or 2 or whatever it is, right? And things like, what are we going to only really focus on one option per intersection, or could there be more, right? And we've talked about potentially having conditional ones, like, well, if we've magically had $1 billion fall on left, then yeah, we could maybe choose this. Or if there had to be a runoff between 2 or something, right? What is that process going to look like? Are we just going to talk about the viaduct and vote on it, and that's that, right? And then we're going to go through each option singly. And then if we have 2 out of 3 winning, then we're going to go back and vote again. So I'm very curious about how that's going to go. And so please, choose to either pause this to help me out, or we can do this later, because I think we'll eventually get to it anyway.
Yeah, so I think to answer your question, really, we're just kind of doing a warm up, right, to get us used to all talking, because in what happens on these things, especially it's sort of a Zoom default, is that I don't want to be the one who's talking all the time. I really want to hear from all of you, and so making sure that everybody gets to speak each time really makes it clear that the public and I get to hear from each of you, and everybody gets kind of to kind of go through their thoughts. Greg started us on the viaduct. I find it interesting that we're all kind of struggling with the viaduct. My plan was to continue to go through the other two alternatives for Churchill, do pros and cons for both, and then kind of come back and wrap around and see where we are. We're not quite done with the round robin, but another potential. I'd rather have everybody talk about all the alternatives first before we do anything drastic, and that was sort of my plan, at least for the Churchill alternative. And then, if this works, we can apply it to Meadow Charleston. I think, frankly, Meadow Charleston's a little more complicated just because there's also so many more alternatives. But for the Churchill alternative, that was sort of the plan. So that's kind of what we're doing. And I take suggestions, and because by no means is there a book guiding me. And so, if you have thoughts about it, feel free to email me afterwards, or we can talk offline, and I'm happy to hear any other thoughts, because we're probably not going to get to a final answer today, is my best guess. So, thank you. Okay, so then we have Carrie, and then Tony, I'll come back to you after that.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're going to cover any new ground on my feedback. I think that we've talked a lot about the facilitating the traffic across Alma at Churchill, but if it's elevated, there's potential for other crossings to occur under the train tracks. So, understanding that movement facilitation could happen at multiple points might be a pro. We've talked about the reduce and delay and things like that. You won't have to wait for the train tracks. I guess, the biggest problem that I have with the viaduct, I think, is how much of a different experience it is if you live there versus if you're a person that just traverses the intersection, right? It feels very imbalanced in that way, because the effects are pretty high for people who live near the tracks in terms of visual and noise. I'm also aware that the noise will be improved, but to what extent, like Dave, I don't really know enough to feel comfortable elevating the tracks. But we have discussed it to the extent we can with the knowledge we have now, and the rest of that comes later, right, in the design process. But the cost, I understand it is going to be a multi-year project, but we're already in a potentially multi-year financial crisis in the city, right? It is going to be very hard to pull this off if it has to compete with so many other priorities getting back on track in terms of budget.
Great, thank you. All right, Tony, you're up.
Okay, so I take it we were just talking about Churchill and a viaduct, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I think to talk about that just without looking at the other alternatives is difficult, because we have to choose, like Larry said. 6 months ago, Larry said we are going to be faced with choosing among bad options, or options that are not fully compatible with Palo Alto's visual character. But I see that the other two alternatives are really pretty poor for pedestrians and bikes. And so I'd like to talk about the viaduct. The viaduct allows 12 movements, which then as a result does not have cars going through the neighborhood. That's a big plus for me. The bikes and peds on grade, which is Palo Alto's character, which is a big plus for me. The construction of the viaduct does not require shoe fly tracks. That's a plus. And I think construction is faster than others. And we have to remember that the construction will happen during gridlock. And the faster we get this thing done, the more tolerant people will be, I guess. The two downsides are the visual. The visual is intense and severe from backyards from Mariposa, but that 32 or maybe 25, depending on where the tracks have to rise. And so it's a sacrifice of these 25 homeowners for the benefit of the larger population. It seems to be that the other alternatives export the problem to other locations. And so those are my comments on the viaduct.
Do you have another con for the viaduct? I got one is the visual.
It's visual and cost.
Okay, cost. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
So to quote Carrie, I'm also not going to cover any new ground here. So I basically landed where all of you are, which is the pro that I see for the viaduct is all modes and potentially the use of space, potentially not having any, reducing the amount of delays. But for me, the cost is a big obstacle, particularly the bang for the buck. When I think about spending $300 million, that's sort of not the first thing I'd like to spend money on. And then of course, visual and noise and the problem for everyone sort of along Mariposa. I recognize this is sort of going to be a similar discussion about South Palo Alto, but it's particularly tight. The right of way is much smaller or significantly smaller, I should say, in the north, which just adds to the things that already make the viaduct generally everyone's least favorite, or at least the least popular based on what I can tell. So I'm in the same place where everybody else is. Okay, so that was for the viaduct. So now we're gonna go, I think we'll just do backwards alphabetical order. So Carrie, I'm gonna put you on first this time. And you can choose if you do wanna talk next about the partial closure or, the partial underpass or the closure. And we're gonna just do two pros and cons. You don't have to give away kind of where you are, but just give me your best two pros and cons on this one.
Well, let's start with closure because
okay.
Everybody loves to talk about this one. We've heard a lot of comments tonight. Why don't we just go for it?
Right.
Pros for closure is it's quick and easy. That's two.
Okay.
Pros. It obviously doesn't help with cross corridor movement. It also is problematic for school kids who are on the other side of Alma who may normally use that corridor, that they may have to go pretty far out of their way to get to school.
Yeah, great. So Dave, you're up.
Quick and easy, just like Carrie said. It's the cheapest one out of all that. I think being fiscally responsible this option is the best one out of all of them. It's plus mitigations, right? And we studied those over and over again, that improving Embarcadero and Oregon Expressway is going to be beneficial to the whole community. All the backups at the Town and Country in Embarcadero, we're looking to fix all that. So all those things will improve if this option, takes shape. We do have provisions for the bike and ped connectivity there, so that's been thought of and put in there. It also preserves the neighborhoods over at the Southgate and Churchill in Old Palo Alto. Now, I know that there's a lot of people out there who think that over by Embarcadero, that's going to get worse. But the best modeling that we've got shows that this is actually going to get better. So I don't know what else to say about that. It's just the best that we've got. Now, if I were to put a con on it, I would say that There
gotta
are.
put two.
What's that?
I said you gotta put two cons.
Oh. Well, I'll put the light at El Camino in Oregon and the light at Embarcadero and El Camino too, because they are not managed by locally by Palo Alto. And so I would say those two are a risk that this whole thing could not improve as much as we think it would be.
Okay. But do you have a con about so the con about the viaduct itself, you're saying is really about the mitigations related to the con? Do you have something that's like viaduct related or?
Sorry, we're talking about closure, aren't we?
Sorry, yeah, sorry, closure. Did I say viaducts? I'm sorry,
Yes.
my head is still back. Yes, so closure related. Yeah, that was more about the mitigations, but do you have anything about the closure itself?
If we're talking about access directly at that road, yeah, then we lose one access point.
Okay.
But we've worked really hard to make access better in other two places.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So Keith, you're next.
Okay, the pros, I mean, one is that you wouldn't have any property acquisitions, and the other is that it would make Churchill much more of a neighborhood street. It really is, especially during rush hour. There's a lot of cars going through that. So those would be both pros for it. The cons are connectivity, and the South Gate now they're more on an island, so it's more peaceful. But it also means that if you want to get out, you can't get out as easily. And then the other thing is Embarcadero traffic, is that this traffic will go out, and the mitigations will help, but the mitigations also, we have to be careful about comparing apples and oranges, because you could do the mitigations with the status quo or with any of the options. So certainly if you're closing this out, the traffic that would be going across Churchill now has to go somewhere. And Embarcadero and Page Mill both are bad right now. So we don't have a lot of options for that.
Okay, thank you. Larry?
The pros, I think, are lowest cost and that the project is reversible. That is that we could open it up again if things don't work out. And the cons are loss of connectivity and the potential traffic problems on Embarcadero.
Okay. Inyoung.
Okay, so pro is cheaper, safety for the children and pedestrian bikes, and also I think, as Larry mentioned, if you don't like it, you can change it, changeability. So if we close it and we don't like the traffic in Embarcadero and traffic in Oregon, we can open up. So I think that's three things that I think it's mostly important for the closing give us. And then the cons would be, I have to drive a little longer to get to the old Palo Alto or South Palo Alto. And I think I leave it at that.
No other cons? Get one more.
I think that the commuters who use the Churchill to go to Stanford Hospital or Stanford University, they have to find the other way to go around, right? Because if you live, so I think these cons are more to the commuter using the Churchill rather than people who live in Palo Alto.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Sorry, I'm going to push everybody on these a little bit. We gotta really try. Tony, you're next.
So I just wanted to clarify this issue about being able to open it up again. My understanding of the geometry does not allow us to open it up ever, probably 100 years. Once the tracks are on there, we're going to have to rebuild the shoe-fly tracks if we want to change to a
Well, we're talking about
solution.
This is talking about closing. So you would just leave the tracks where they are. The tracks don't move.
The tracks don't move, right?
The closure to cars. So no
Closer to
cars, no
cars.
bikes, no peds can cross.
Correct.
And you'd have the underpass made for bikes and peds.
If we go with that solution, I think it's permanent. You can't change it back. I don't think.
So what are your pros and cons?
So my pros and cons. Firstly, I think that the closure exports the problem to other neighborhoods, especially the one in Professorville, which has a on-ramp to get onto Embarcadero, and the intersection that doesn't seem to have grabbed a lot of public support from people who live on the street, and I don't think it's Palo Alto-like yet. Probably could be done. The second one is that the closure diverts pedestrians and bikes to way out further away from where they want to go. And so those are my two cons. The pros are the immediate neighborhood, the 2 blocks right next to Churchill benefit tremendously from this export of the problem because it's going to become a much quieter neighborhood, but the problem is exported to Professorville and Oregon. And I think the other pro is that it's cheaper.
Okay, great. Phil.
I think the pros are clearly that it's low cost, and second, that it has a traffic calming effect along Churchill. My two cons are, one, as Tony said very clearly, it exports the impact to some other neighborhood. I don't know how equitable that is. The other objection I have is a little more philosophical, and this goes, the modeling was all done based on 2030 traffic volumes because that's what the city has made available. They don't have anything beyond 2030. And yet we can expect this project to have impact in the years 2040 and beyond. I may not be around to see them, but we can be sure they'll be there. Now, because of the pandemic, people have pointed out that Caltrain is on pause. That's correct. But as Larry said, and I'll amplify it, economic history is that this economy will more or less restore itself. Not exactly the way it was done before, but more or less. I can speak personally and say that as a consultant, the bane of being a consultant is working at home in isolation from other people. Once companies get over the immediate shock, if you will, of the pandemic, there will probably be a lot of employee demand just to be back in the office, if only for those casual interactions. So is anybody familiar with the new Apple campus? There was a big circle, the spaceship, I think it's called. It was designed precisely to foster informal face-to-face communications as a method of improving creativity and productivity. I think companies will discover that after a while. Therefore, my assumption is that we will see 2030 traffic volumes, maybe not till 2035, as a very rough cut, so that we will go back to, and Caltrain will respond accordingly. Thus, we have to be prepared. And as Larry said, this is a 10-year view, not a 1-year view. So my big concern about the entire traffic study, and this is not to impugn Gary Black, is that it's very myopic. And that Gary did the best he could. And by the way, when anybody, I would like to say, I don't think he was being rosy. He was being professional. Gary displays the highest professional integrity. But we have to assume that because the study is designed to be myopic, that we're really ignoring the effects of traffic beyond 2030. And for that reason, I am very concerned about decreasing east-west connectivity. Okay, sorry for the big speech, but I had to get those points out.
Okay, we're all warming up.
Okay, next.
All right, Greg, your turn.
Okay, yeah, I want to go back to what Larry said about, why should we just pack it up and go home? And I'm wondering if in one of these meetings, we should just have a vote to decide if we want to pack it up and go home so that we can put that issue to rest. I refuse to believe that people are going to all leave Silicon Valley and work from Idaho forever because of the coronavirus. We've been in this for 5 months. I don't know whether it'll be 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years, but I think things are going to go back to some sort of normal at some point. And I think that making a decision like not separating the trains from the tracks because of the way things are during an extremely unusual time in American history would be a mistake. And I would be very uncomfortable doing that. I'm looking right now at the Google Maps of the Churchill crossing, and I'm thinking about my son who's going to be riding across it on his bicycle a year from now, and I'm kind of scared to death. And at some point, I would also want to make sure we get on our report that there are pros to every single grade crossing alternative we pick other than do nothing. We talked a lot about the traffic because people in Palo Alto seem to care an awful lot about traffic. But I'll also point out that there have been, for instance, 6 accidents at Churchill since 2008. They were all cars. None of them were suicides. Nobody was killed, partly because there are guards who are stationed at the track at Churchill most of the time to keep people safe. I'll also point out that every single grade crossing closing option we have will eliminate the sound of the train horns. And the train horns are extremely loud and can actually be heard everywhere in Palo Alto. So I'll stop my lecture, but anyway, I'm getting excited. So getting to the closure, the pros of, and we keep calling it the closure, closing Churchill to cars. The big pro of closing Churchill to cars, in my opinion, is that it gives a very, very safe experience for bicycles and pedestrians. And that's tremendously important given how close this is. This is the main thoroughfare to Palo Alto High School. The option, especially the option that has a big, a nice big wide underpass going down the middle of Churchill, I think it's either option A or option B that's been presented from the staff, I think is a big improvement over bike connectivity now. And as a matter of fact, going to be a safer and better experience for bikes and pedestrians than any of the alternatives. And that's really important given where it is. I also think that, a matter of fact, it's so nice that I bet it would become the major bike thoroughfare from Stanford into the rest of Palo Alto. And the people who live near Churchill Avenue might not be quite as excited about it when they see the giant flood of cyclists that are going to be coming down their street. And I think that would be a beautiful thing, but might not like it if it happens. The other pro is that it's the cheapest option. And we've got some very complicated problems to solve down in the other 2 crossings. Where the safety problem is much worse, where people have been killed. No one's ever been killed at Churchill that I'm aware of. And it's going to cost a lot of money to fix those. There's no cheap option down there. So to me, the pro of safe and the pro of least expensive are my 2 pros, and they're big pros. The 2 cons are traffic and connectivity. I think Gary Black is very accurate, and I think improving the traffic patterns elsewhere is going to have a beneficial effect. And I couldn't tell you whether the problem is going to be real bad or just a little bit worse, but there's no doubt that closing this intersection to cars is going to send traffic elsewhere. There's no way that doesn't happen. And the second is connectivity. We did hear from the PAUSD, their trucks and buses frequently use the Churchill crossing to get to different parts of Palo Alto. That means they've got to go farther around, which means more pollution. Those are the 2 cons.
Thanks. Okay, so again, I'm going to keep quoting Carrie. I'm not going to cover all new ground here, but I'm in the same boat in terms of closure. It's obviously the cheapest, and it also provides the safest connection for bikes. Like Greg, I like the one where the bikes go in the middle of the road because I just think it's the widest and easiest way through. The cons for me are the fact that it moves the problem elsewhere, and then it becomes, how much faith do we have in traffic consultants and their mitigations and their predictions, and those are difficult to understand. And the connectivity for the Southgate residents. There's a neighborhood in South Palo Alto that is also somewhat isolated. It's sort of down by the Lozano's car wash, a little bit north of that. And it's impactful. It makes them feel separated from the rest of the city. And I'm mindful of how that would feel to the Southgate residents and everybody else. I did want to just throw in my comment. I'm not sure about the reversible comment about the closing it. simply because I think all of this would require some negotiation with Caltrain. So presumably to reverse it back, you would have to then renegotiate with Caltrain again, and I don't know how that works. And I would just say that from a safety perspective, the FRA really looks to reduce and eliminate closures whenever possible. And once you've closed one, opening it again is really, really an uphill climb.
You mean
so,
reduce and eliminate crossings wherever possible, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
reduce or eliminate crossings is what they'd like to do. You know, all things being equal, they're like, great, everybody stay away from our crossing. But once you've closed one, reopening one is very difficult. It's really because they're trying to make less of them, not more. So I just wanted to throw that out there as something that we can consider afterwards. Okay, so now we are on partial underpass. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna go in the middle. I'm just gonna call you guys randomly, keep you guys awake here, and we'll see how this goes. So actually, Larry, I'll start with you because I'm kind of starting in the middle, and that's where my finger landed. So I'll let you go, and then partial underpass.
Well, the pros are that it keeps the connectivity east-west to some degree, not totally, but it's better than closing it. Then second, I think that it has a lot of community support. Or maybe put that in the reverse, saying that would not impose potentially more traffic on other neighborhoods. The cons are that I think that it's sort of what my engineering friends call a kludge. That it seems like it's really made up a lot of different parts that don't really quite go together very well. And its cost, of course, is also a negative.
Okay, great. Keith, how about you?
Sorry. Yeah, instead of giving 2 and 2, I'm going to give a pro, con, and uncertainty. So the pros would be just the opposite of the closures. The pros are you have connectivity for Southgate, and you're also not throwing traffic onto Embarcadero and Page Mill. The cons are that it's going to be much more expensive than the closure, and you also have property impacts. But the big uncertainties are shoe fly and right of way, and those are two really big questions on this. Is that if you don't have the right of way and you have to do a shoe fly, that's a much different situation than the opposite. So those really, this kind of hangs in the balance of information that we don't have right now.
Great, thank you for that. Tony, how about you?
So I'll start with the cons because and then I'll try to think of pros. Firstly, it reduces the number of movements for cars, which means it naturally transfers some of the problems to other intersections. Another con is that the bikes and peds are not a priority in this one, and it has a non-compatible relationship compared with the neighborhoods it's adjacent to. The quality of bikes and peds on the neighborhood streets are beautiful, with tree-lined sidewalks and so on. And this one goes into a concrete trench with very little ability to landscape or make this thing look good or feel good. And then the second con is that it's going to be constructed during gridlock, which is a horrendously difficult task to be able to do construction in, and it takes much longer than the other alternatives. I don't have any pros.
I got to push you on that, Tony. There's got to be some pros to the partial underpass.
On the partial underpass, I think the railings will look good. the release was good, and I really can't think of a pro. Sorry, I'll think about something later.
Okay. All right, Dave Shen.
Let's see. I guess pros would be connectivity is preserved for most of it. And there seems to be some desire to do that amongst the community. So it's got some support on that. The big cons for me are the cost, which is still orders of magnitude greater than closure, but less than Viaduct, but still it's quite a big amount. I actually don't think the solution that we came up with the bike ped is the right one. I think it's too narrow. I think it goes down the middle of the street, which is not ideal. Imagine hundreds of bikers going down that path in the morning. If you've ever ridden down California Avenue, it's only 3 feet wider than that. And I can't see even two bikes riding abreast down that road, and forget about anybody coming the other way. So to me, we need a better solution than a straight shot underneath Alma. In any case, that also applies to Churchill closure, by the way. It's going to be a visual challenge. I mean, there's going to be a lot of stuff going on there. The kludge, as Larry has put it. And we haven't really studied induced traffic there, quite frankly. It's going to attract more people there because people can get through now. And that little stretch of Churchill is going to be a parking lot. It's already tough to get out of the district office over at PAUSD, and it's going to be impossible to do it once there's even more cars there.
Okay. Carrie, I did want to acknowledge, I know you have PTC starting at 6 o'clock. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll give you comments and then I got to bail.
Thank you for your service in back-to-back, very long, very complicated
It's going to
meetings.
be 9 awesome hours straight on Zoom. I'm so looking forward to it.
Hope you have a standing desk.
Right? So the partial underpass, what can I say is this is one of these, it's a creative approach on how to minimize and equally spread our pros and cons amongst different people in the community. And I think that is really where it came from at its heart, was to try and make nobody have something totally awful happening if we went this route. I am concerned about the bike underpass as well. Okay, wait, so you want 2 pros. So the pros are that it flattens the spike of pain of the changes to this intersection amongst different people. And yeah, I guess doesn't elevate the train or add any additional visual changes to people adjacent to the tracks. And then the negatives are, it's definitely going to be a major change in our flow of traffic. We don't know how it's going to impact Churchill, if we will have backups and things like that. That is a risk. We really, it's so different that it's going to be harder to imagine and harder to model. But I think it also, I'm concerned about that this requires us to start taking properties or partial slivers of properties, to be specific, but it is the least good in that way.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, Phil Burton.
Ouch. So the pros that I can see, and I hope I'm not repeating too much, is that this alternative does enjoy some measure of community support. And based on Gary Black's analysis, myopic as might be, shows that this alternative does keep the vast majority of the current traffic from being diverted. So it'll have minimal impacts on Embarcadero or Oregon. Now those are pros. The negatives, oy vey, that's a technical term for I'm really concerned.
Yeah.
The property impacts are there. There is a lot of neighborhood apprehension, which is kind of the flip side of neighborhood support. There are, I'll add a third, issues with Caltrain overtaking some of their right of way. We can't lose sight of that one. That could be a deal breaker. Okay, those are mine.
Okay, great. Greg.
Hey there. And by the way, I will say I'm missing back to school night, which they dumped on me a week ago. I wouldn't mind if we ended at 6:02. So the pros for this are that it preserves some traffic movement, whereas opposed to the closure to cars eliminates all traffic movement, and it preserves some connectivity. The other pro is that one pro is that it preserves some traffic movement. The other pro is that it's cheaper than the viaduct. I had high hopes for this. I was hoping it would be the solution that goes right down the middle and cleverly hacks away to solve the problem without being as bad for everybody. But like Larry and Phil said, yeah, there's a number of Yiddish words that could apply. I think the cons I had no trouble coming up with more than 2 cons. The biggest cons for me, one is the safety for pedestrians and bicyclists. We're moving the crossing point over to Kellogg. People who live on Kellogg have given us a lot of reasons why they're not happy about that, but it's a longer, more circuitous route. It won't be as attractive to people coming from Stanford. It won't be attractive for pedestrians. And we've created sort of this impenetrable pedestrian barrier that stretches for many blocks. I'm looking at the 3D rendering as I talk to you, that stretches for many blocks down Alma. And I'm afraid that people won't be able to walk from one side to the other for a long way. And as a matter of fact, some people might be so dumb as to try and cross and then end up at that wall, and then who knows what's going to happen. So I think for pedestrians and bicyclists, this is a very big negative. The other big con is that I know that people feel that this is less ugly than the viaduct, but I don't think it's a lot less ugly than the viaduct. It's an awful lot of concrete. And some of the renderings that have been produced, especially for people driving down Alma, they're driving through a concrete trench essentially. And I think that will impact the neighborhood, and the neighbors will over time grow to dislike the like of this as much as they are saying they would dislike the look of the viaduct.
Okay, thank you. Inyoung, I think that leaves you.
Okay. I think the pro is making some of the community in Embarcadero and some of the Southgate community that is supporting this option, make them very happy because of the connectivity. But I got a lot of cons because just there's no room to build this thing. I mean, they did have a preliminary study, but they, it's a doable, they have extra, I mean, currently it's a very narrow to have a 3-lane on one side going to northbound, but you can have another lane to turn. So that, I don't know how possibly they can build, only if the Caltrain allows us to build it, but that's uncertainty. So that's, that might not be possible. And also there is the pumping station, other things need to go. There is no room. It hasn't hashed out properly, in my opinion. So if I don't think it's a buildable, but I think, so we can spend a lot more money to study whether it's a buildable or, have eliminated. Or another thing is a safety, right? So if I'm driving that corner underpath, and then there's a traffic to turn to the left from going to North Arma underpath, I think that there will be lots of blind spot, and I think I'll be more, as a driver, I think it will be very dangerous. I can go very slow, but still, it's just not big and not large enough to drive, and then you go down underpass, and then there is a traffic light, and then you can't see all the sides, right? So I think it's very dangerous for the driver. And I think the cost, it's very expensive relative to other options. And another thing is also like, it's going to take forever to build, and then you have to move the dirt. I'm not sure if I want to live here if they're going to build this thing, and it's my neighbor, they're going to have a property impact, partial property impact. And I don't think that they want to live there if this option is going. And if you go look at the Embarcadero right next to underpass, and you will have a feeling how this is going to be. So, I'm really opposed to this option, but I think I appreciate.
Did you have another pro, Inya? You have the traffic will be equally split basically on connectivity. Did you have anything else in a pro that you can think of?
Let me think about it. I'll get back to you.
Okay, Tony, you were still thinking, did you want to add a pro?
Didn't think of any. I couldn't.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Okay, well, so that leaves me. And basically the pros is what many of you have said, right? Which is that I think it's a really valiant attempt to try to mitigate the crappiness of both the closure and the viaduct, and try to have the traffic situation be mitigated, but of course not all things. I also think that obviously the cost, it's better than a viaduct, worse than a closure. In terms of the cons for me, I'm really concerned also about the bike ped crossing. As you know, I think that Seal should have been looked at, and I also really, feel like this alternative didn't really get a fair shake because we kind of ran out of time and out of money. So it really hasn't had a chance to be significantly improved. When we talked about why there's a bike ped crossing at Kellogg, Gary Black said, well, it could also be at Seal. Like, there wasn't really a lot of thoughtful discussion, in my opinion, about where the location of that bike ped crossing could be. And in talking to more folks from the Safe Routes to Schools and the bike committee, even though it seems like it should be closer to Pali, actually the kids that cross there, really most of them who are further north actually go on Embarcadero already. So the folks are serving actually the ones a bit further south. So there is some merit to probably moving south. Of course, it would have impacts in around Seal, and it would have impacts onto Park Boulevard where it spills out on the other side, which I think would merit some discussion, which we have not been able to have just because of time and money concerns. So for me, those are the big things. Also, the Caltrain uncertainty, I think where I am on that one is, yes, it's a concern, but the reality is unless Palo Alto and this committee, frankly, and the council get behind saying, well, we really want to figure out if this alternative is possible, they're simply just going to say no anyway. So we have to, basically say, this is what we're most excited about for our elected officials to then go back and negotiate with Caltrain. So to me, that's a negotiable one, but it does take, significant support. And I think it's interesting that there has been at least some community support, more than at least there has been for the viaduct. So that's where I am personally on that one. Okay, well, this has been a long sort of first day. And I know Carrie has to go and Greg has back to school night, and I'm sensitive to both of those things. I think we will put a pin in it here and think about how to, if you have suggestions, Dave or others, about how you want to go through the next meeting and kind of move from this next point, I'm totally open to hearing those. But otherwise, I think we've at least kind of talked through some of this stuff. And I'm going to talk to Larry about trying to figure out, I took copious notes on what you guys all said, and I'm going to try to figure out a way to kind of report those back and maybe even put those into Carrie's matrix and see if we could use that as a tool to kind of go through where we are on that. So just to share how that went for me. We do have one other item on the agenda, and Carrie and Greg, if you have to go, that's okay. But it is to talk about the working group updates and the member updates. If there's anybody who wanted to talk about their different sections, now would be a good time to do that. So if anybody has anything that they want to say about their sections, we did get a draft of chapter 2, and I know Larry has been working on doing edits for me while I have had to step out for my move. So I did want to address, I heard at the last meeting, you all volunteered me so nicely to have to be the one to put everybody's comments together. So thanks for that. I will never miss a meeting again. But seriously, that is part of the way that we were considering this, was to have sort of several rounds of edits and then kind of have this big kind of pushing things together. And this will take some time, but the point of having you guys turn in these edits and having them become public is that each time that gives us a new round of being able to have new people sort of look at each section. So, you know, this may take a while. We think deliberations might take a while, but actually final report could take even longer. And I think, you know, patience is going to be the word that we have here. Yeah, Phil.
So probably 2 meetings ago now, there was a comment that Megan Kahn had done some really good work on impacts. Maybe I haven't tried hard enough, but I don't know where to look for her work.
So in the previous agendas, under the informational section, just like today's agenda, we have an informational section that shows the final traffic report and then a draft of chapter 2. I believe Megan's chapter was draft of chapter 4. So you'd have to go back maybe 2 or 3 meetings and see where that is. If you still can't find it, shoot me an email and I'm happy to send you the link. So that
all right, okay, I'll do, because I want to kind of power through this,
yeah,
get the final workout in
we
time
all
for.
do.
No, I know, and it may be 2 meetings before I'm ready with that. I mean, it's me and Tony, of course, but I kind of said I would do the first cut, but I really don't want to do this in the absence of Megan's work.
Okay, great. I'll make sure that I send you the pointer to where that is.
I really am anxious for feedback from the public on the partial we've done so far. And that applies both to the impact and also to the section that I wrote about chapter 1, the Caltrain perspective on this whole project.
Great. So for all of you watching, Phil is begging you to send us public comments on his chapter 1 if you've got feedback for him. That would be great.
As in the presentation format, as well as specific facts or statements.
Great.
I'm really looking for that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? We're good. Tony, did you have something?
Yes, I had a question on what Phil just brought up, and that is, how do we get to edit some parts? Like there's a floating sentence there that has no beginning and no end, and there's some typos. Can we change those?
Sure. Or, you could, Larry, what's the best way for them to send edits at this point?
I didn't understand that question, please.
Oh, Tony, you accidentally muted yourself. There you go.
Sorry. There's a floating sentence, half a sentence that's in the findings report, and also some typos. So how do we go about editing that stuff? Do we have to do it in public, or can we substitute?
No, you go ahead and do. Well, which chapter are you referring to, Tony?
4.
That was the one that Megan was doing?
Findings, yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I think this is the draft that Phil and Tony were working on, not Megan's draft. You're not working for Megan's draft, are you, Tony?
Not yet. But
no,
I think
okay,
Phil wants to incorporate Megan's, and I do.
Given that these are just, I think it's perfectly appropriate to make corrections. Just send the revised one to send it to Sarah, and then she can attach it to the next agenda and just say, here's a draft of chapter 4 or whatever chapter it is, with just a parenthesis showing that it's been revised.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, great. And
I'm sorry, Larry, could you I just blanked. Could you go over that again? I'm really sorry. I just had a mental blip.
No problem. No, if something has already been made public, but no section of the report's been approved by the committee, so that's not a problem at all. So the drafts that have been made public so far can certainly be corrected if you spot something that needs to be corrected. When you do that, just provide a copy to Sarah so she can put it on the next agenda as an information item, saying chapter 4 or 5 or whatever, paren revised.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that.
And we will do a universal spell check, so don't worry too much about the typos. Hanging sentences, I understand, but we'll be using Grammarly, I'm sure. So, Greg, did you have something? I know you wanted to go.
Yeah, like I said, I made a draft of the safety chapter, and I've completely forgotten what number it is, and I shared it with Nadia and Larry because you wanted to see it first. So I'm assuming that you can look at it, and if you can't, let me know. I'm not planning on doing any more work on it until you come back to me and tell me what to do next.
That's fine. Full disclosure on my part, I have read 0 chapters because, as you guys know, I have been trying to move. And if you didn't catch well, when we all got on the call, I also had a major plumbing emergency, which requires redigging up my entire front lawn. So super fun.
Goody.
Yeah, yeah. So, so Larry, I'll let you answer about where you are in terms of having read that chapter yet.
Oh, I've not read that chapter yet. But
Okay, I wanted to make sure you got my sharing of the Google Doc. Okay,
yes,
cool.
You're good.
Okay, great. Thank you. I am going to drop off then. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, I think if anybody else has anything, I don't see any